Welcome to the Buckeye Battle Cry Show, where I discuss college football games and hot topics. I am your host, Brandon Held. This week's topics, I'm going to be talking about the Week 12 highlights of college football, the Buckeyes versus Purdue, my top 5 games review, my top 10 rankings, a look at the playoff pictures and teams in each conference that are going to have a chance to get into the playoffs, and preview of Week 13's top 5 games along with my picks. Now, I want to start off this week's show with a moment of gratitude. For those of you that don't know, I'm just a regular guy like most of you that work a 9-to-5 Monday through Friday job, and I'm trying to build something with my quote-unquote free time by doing this Buckeye Battle Cry show. And in my younger days, I went to college to pursue a broadcasting degree because I wanted to do sports play-by-play for a living. Specifically basketball and football. I was unable to pursue that dream, but I continued to stay a huge sports fan and, of course, never missed the Ohio State Buckeye football games, along with watching college football just all day, Saturdays, and then every big game for many years. In the last 10 years, it's become my one and only sport that I love and follow. That's college football. I used to watch all the sports. I used to play all the sports. You name it. I used to watch it. I used to play it. But I really started to focus on college football about 10 years ago. And like you, I watch TV and I get super irritated with all the narrative of and hidden agenda of the other sports programs. They're not speaking from their heart or their head, but just speaking for what's best for the brand or the show that they're working for. So I thought, well, I can do better than these guys. And it was time for me at 52 to start showing what I can do, even if it's at my own cost, my money out of my pocket. And so here I am. I watch, I write, and I put the show together. And the only thing I don't do is the editing. I pay my guy Matt to edit it for me, and he puts in the great graphics you see, and he gives it back to me, and it goes straight to YouTube. He too is from the OH and also an Ohio State fan. So my gratitude is for all of you. The last couple of weeks, my watches, my views have far surpassed anything I could have dreamed of for my first season. And you guys have been following at a much higher rate recently. So thank you from the bottom of my heart. And if you like the show, please let other Buckeye fans know about it. And please subscribe, like, and comment, because comments are great for the algorithm, and this gets the show out to other Buckeye fans. Now it's time for the Week 12 highlights. Of course, we will start with the game, the one that really matters to all of us, and that's the Ohio State versus UCLA game. The game happens in a couple weeks, but the game this week, the Buckeyes obviously won 48-10. Over UCLA, which was no surprise on the final score, and they actually covered the spread if that's something that you care about. But this was not the game or match we were expecting. UCLA's quarterback Nico Lamaleava didn't play, and this really wasn't announced or known until the day before the game, citing a concussion. In fairness, it's probably a leftover concussion from the last time he stepped on the field in Columbus and got absolutely destroyed by the Buckeyes in the first playoff game on their way to the national championship title last year. But also somewhat what was surprising was the fact that Carnell Tate did not play again. He didn't even suit up. He was on the sidelines in street clothes, as they like to say. The military man in me wants to call them civvies or civilian clothes, but that's a different topic for a different time. Then very early on in the game, after only about 4 catches for 40 yards, Jeremiah Smith got injured. and went out for the game. Then all of a sudden, the game becomes a lot more interesting, not necessarily in a good way if you're a Buckeye fan, but in a way to see what these guys who don't normally get many reps at the wide receiver position can actually do. Brandon Inniss and Max Clare became Sayan's comfort blankets as he was used to going to them, and they got 11 catches combined. But you also got to see the backup players who had a combined 8 catches, and Sayan were not quite in sync with the backup players, as he had his worst game of the season when he went 23 of 31 for only about 74% and 184 yards passing. What the Buckeyes were able to lean on and capitalize on was something they really hadn't been able to do all season, and that was the running game. Bo Jackson went for a career high for 112 yards. Isaiah West had some nice runs. And of course, James Peoples had this run with an amazing hurdle that showed just what a great athlete he is. And if he can use his vision and see the holes better as the season progresses, he is a dangerous running back. He's a very versatile athlete. He just has been struggling to see the holes this year, and hopefully we can see more of this out of James Peoples the rest of this season. The defense was great until some backup guys came in to get some playing time. The takeaway there is statistically, the Buckeyes gave up 10 points. UCLA played their starters on both sides of the ball the entire game pretty much. So it was valuable playing time for the backups for both the offense and defense against a Big Ten's opponents' number ones. Even Lincoln Kienholz had a great drive where he went 3 for 3 in passing and took the team down for a touchdown. Overall, just sheer domination again by the Buckeyes, who were not even at full power with Carnell Tate and Jeremiah Smith out of the game. Two of the best wide receivers, well, definitely the best wide receiver combo in the country, and two of the best wide receivers in the country for sure. For those of you that like numbers, the Buckeyes had 218 yards passing and 222 yards rushing. It was a very balanced attack. UCLA finished with 154 yards passing and 68 yards rushing, and that will just not get it done. Neither team had a turnover. Some bad calls in this game, again, by officiating, as usual. This time they didn't all go against the Buckeyes. The officials still just, they need a lot of work. Another game against the Buckeyes where the defensive line didn't get a holding call against them by the UCLA offensive line. That didn't happen at all last season, and it hasn't happened again this season. And we have 2 games left in the regular season, and still no holding calls against Buckeyes opponents' offensive line, which is incredible to me. It's amazing how nobody ever holds the Buckeyes defensive line and linebackers. You know, those NFL guys that are in the NFL. Yeah, none of these college offensive linemen hold them. It's unbelievable. All right, on to the next game, and that was Oregon versus Minnesota. Now, Oregon won this game handily, 42-13, and covered the spread of the 22.5 points they were favored. Offensively, Oregon did whatever they wanted against Minnesota. Moore passed for 331 yards, and they ran the ball for 179 yards, and Oregon even turned the ball over once. The talent disparity between Minnesota and Oregon, or Minnesota and any of the upper echelon Big Ten teams, is just too much. So Oregon rolls. It does beg the question to me, what does Minnesota expect from their head coach, PJ Fleck? He is 58-39 overall since he has been at Minnesota. But is that good enough? Is there an expectation there that he's supposed to elevate the program to a higher status and put them in the upper tier of the Big Ten? Or is just beating lower tier Big Ten opponents and getting absolutely hammered by the Ohio States and Oregons of the Big Ten just okay? Is just making a bowl game good enough as well? Genuinely, I don't know if PJ Fleck is in trouble or on the proverbial hot seat, or is he just chilling with around a 500 record because they will make another bowl game? It will be interesting to see what Minnesota does at the end of the season. That to me will tell me, do they think they can be the next Indiana, or are they just who they are and that's good enough? Okay, so obviously I picked Oregon to win that one, and that makes me 2-0 so far on this week's picks with Ohio State and Oregon. The next game I picked last week was Notre Dame at Pitt. Notre Dame was favored by 10.5, and they won pretty handily, 37-15. And it was just never really a close game. I haven't followed Pitt very much this season. I don't really know enough about Pitt going into that game to say that they have the team that could upset Notre Dame. But I did know that I believed Notre Dame was the best two-loss team in the country going into the week. I will have to rethink that now with what happened with Oklahoma and Bama, but I'll discuss that later. Notre Dame offensively was surprisingly passing the ball quite a bit in this game. CJ Carr went 21 of 32, which is a 65% completion rate for 212 yards, but it was, 32 pass attempts is pretty high for Notre Dame. And outside of Jeremiah Love, who, let's face it, he's probably the best running back in the country, Pitt did do a good job of slowing down the Notre Dame rushing attack. Love went for 23 attempts for 147 yards. And with one run, that I'm sure most of you saw was highlight with a beautiful spin. And basically nobody touched him, and he took it to the house for 56 yards. He averaged 6.4 yards per carry, which is a bit misleading when you have a long run like that. Pitt held the rest of Notre Dame's running backs to just over 2 yards a carry. Notre Dame also had 2 turnovers to Pitt's 1 turnover. And on the other side of the ball, the Notre Dame defense was pretty dominant for the first 3 quarters of the game against Pitt. Pitt made a late game surge to make a game look closer than it actually was. And as I stated earlier, I had picked Notre Dame to win. So this made me 3-0 for my picks in the week. But let's welcome in the SEC games of the week and how they killed my last 2 picks. First up, Oklahoma at Alabama. So Alabama was favored by 7 at home, and Alabama does not lose at home typically. So this was the obvious outright pick if you're not worried about point spread. So I, of course, pick Alabama to win this game. Kalen DeBoer hasn't lost at home yet as head coach until this game. And it looked like Alabama was, I'm not going to say it was going to be an easy game, but they were the better team and they were at home. So should be a game they win. Alabama had 406 yards of total offense. Ty Simpson, their Heisman contending quarterback, went 28 of 42 for 66% completion rate for 326 yards and a touchdown and 1 interception. We'll get to that interception here in a moment. But Alabama ran the ball for 80 yards, and then you think, well, that's not very good. But Oklahoma only ran the ball for 74 yards. And Mateer, Oklahoma's Heisman contending quarterback, went 15 of 23 for only 65%, so 1% worse than Simpson, but he only had 138 passing yards. He didn't throw any touchdown passes, but he also didn't throw any interceptions. So if you didn't watch this game, how did Oklahoma win this game? If you watched any of my previous episodes, you know that I always say the stat that matters the most in football is turnovers, right? So not only did Alabama have 3 turnovers, Simpson had a horrible pick 6. And that was the difference in the game. Oklahoma wins this game 23-21. Simpson was very good at times, and then just very bad at other times. Those 14 incompletions he had weren't from great Oklahoma defense. Many of them were just bad inaccurate throws where he missed guys that were wide open or just behind the receiver. The fourth down throw when they were trying to stay in the game was an awful throw. Yes, he was under pressure, but the guy he was trying to throw it to wasn't even open, and it was a terrible throw. So, frankly, he doesn't belong in the Heisman conversation. And this isn't a 1 week sample that I'm speaking from. He also was not very good against LSU, even though Bama was able to win that game. And frankly, Mateer, who I also don't think belongs in the Heisman conversation, he looked more like an MVP to his team than Simpson did for Bama. Bama has better players on offense and more talent. Their offensive line is a problem, however, but they have great receivers and a great tight end that is playing very well. So congratulations to Oklahoma in keeping your undefeated in regular season game streaks to Alabama alive. If you didn't know, Alabama has never beaten Oklahoma in a regular season game, only bowl games. So with that incorrect pick, I dropped it 3-1 for last week. And then the final game I picked, and it wasn't even close, was Texas at Georgia. Now, I know Georgia typically doesn't lose at home, and they already had lost at home to Alabama this year. But if the SEC has proven anything, the lack of consistency of their teams, you don't know which team you're getting from week to week in the SEC. And you can say that about every team. And you might be like, well, A&M is undefeated. Yeah, but they were down 30-3 at halftime against South Carolina. And if South Carolina wasn't so awful, South Carolina could have held on to win that game, and A&M would have a loss, but they got outplayed 28-0 in the second half to lose that game. Practically the third quarter. South Carolina had given up 3 touchdowns in the third quarter, and A&M was able to get that 4th touchdown early in the fourth quarter. They took the lead early in the fourth quarter in that game. Then it was a stalemate after that. And I don't want to hear, South Carolina is good. Really? South Carolina and Florida are good. Okay. Then so is Wisconsin and Michigan State. Why? Because they're all 3-7, and most of their losses have come against teams with winning records. Anyway, I digress. Back to my point. To Georgia's credit, they showed up fired up for this game, and that was clear from the beginning, and they were able to walk away from this game pretty easily with a 35-10 win, covering the 6.5 points, thanks to a 21-point fourth quarter explosion by Georgia. The only numbers I really have to talk about are each team had a turnover, and Texas ran the ball for a horrible 23 yards, and that's with a running quarterback named Manning. Now, I hear a lot of chatter by the other talking heads who have the privilege of being on TV because they were born to famous athletes or coaches. Well, Texas could get into the playoffs with 3 losses if they beat A&M. Let me be the first to say that even if somehow that happens and A&M takes a day off and lets Texas win, when you lose 35-10 to Georgia, you should not even be in the consideration or conversation for the playoffs. I don't care that their losses are to Georgia and Ohio State. They also lost to the aforementioned 3-7 Florida team. And if Texas gets in the playoffs, no matter what happens from this point out, then that will be a joke. So as you can tell, I had picked Texas to win this game because I thought, I don't know which team's going to show up for either one of them, and Texas just needed to win more. Texas was the safer bet to me. It didn't turn out that way, and so I finished the week 3-2 on my picks. Some other notable games I like to discuss. First of all, USC was able to pick up a big win against Iowa, 26-21, and remain a 2-loss team with their destiny in their own hands with a huge game at Oregon this week. Now, people may scoff at Iowa being 6-4, so what's the big deal? You know, Iowa's a solid football team, and if they played, I don't know, let's say 6-4 LSU, that game might end up being over 3-0, but I'd pick Iowa to win that game. I believe Iowa's a better 6-4 team than LSU is, I would put my money on Iowa in that game. Another game worth noting is Scum, who played at Wrigley Field against Northwestern, ended up winning on a last-second field goal, 24-22. So I have a few things I want to say about this game. First of all, it is so hard for me to watch Fox pregame anymore since they allowed this clown named Dave Portnoy to be on the show. I had never heard of the guy, really, frankly, but this guy, along with people like Paul Feinbaum and Travis Clay, and the list goes on, these are the people that made me feel like I had to put together this show. So this guy here, he has the nerve to stand there and talk about Michigan honor and what that means, because they're the only team in the Big Ten to never have any wins vacated when they are literally just getting off of fines and firings and suspensions from one of the biggest cheating scandals in college football history. He says all of this while standing on a box to make himself look taller than he actually is. Now, I love that Fox calls him out on this. It's like Fox is saying, yeah, we hired him to be on our show, but we know he's a joke, that he's a punchline to our jokes. Then this clown proceeded to say that Michigan will win by double digits and by 40 points. First of all, Scum has to be able to score at least 40 points to be able to win by 40. And how many times have they done that this season? How about one? Against their allies in cheating, Central Michigan, who probably let Scum score so they could represent that garbage state. Finally, that's 2 weeks in a row, Scum narrowly avoids disaster against average and terrible teams in the Big Ten, and they think they're going to beat Ohio State in a couple of weeks because they've gotten lucky lately. Nah, your cheating days are over. And I will remind you that in the last 25 years, Ohio State is 17-7 against Scum. And the only reason they're not 18-7 is because Hairball chickened out of the COVID season game. So this is a heads up to all you Scum fans. If you happen to beat Maryland next week, which I'm not convinced you will, the Buckeyes will come into your big outhouse and destroy whatever hopes and dreams you had of having anything beyond a cheap bowl game at the end of the season. Scum had 5 turnovers in that game, and we're still able to win that game. Now, that's a testament to their defense. Obviously, their defense carried them in that game, but also it's not like Northwestern has a great offense, because they don't. So they were able to pull out a win with 5 turnovers. Now let's check out the current Big Ten standings. Indiana and Ohio State are still on pace to meet in the Big Ten championship with Oregon, USC, and that one team that's still mathematically in the hunt that, as I've stated before, will be eliminated on November 29th. So no need to really discuss their chance. We can discuss Oregon and USC, however. USC is at Oregon and finishes the season with UCLA at home. It's this reason that I'm doubting USC's chances to make it to the playoffs. USC would need to go to Oregon and probably play their best game of the year to get out of there with a win. And then after a tough victory against Iowa this weekend, Oregon will be a tough win for USC. And then Oregon, they have to beat USC, which it's not a given. I think they will, but because it's at home. But then they have to go at Washington. Now, Oregon only needs to win one of those 2 games to make it into the playoffs. But if for some reason they were to drop both of those games, I don't think they will. Let me make that clear. But crazier things have happened in college football. If Oregon did lose both of those games, they would be out and they wouldn't be in the playoffs. Which brings me to this crap ESPN graphic I found on Instagram. ESPN put out teams' chances to make the college football playoff. Now, in my opinion, the only team that has 100% chance of making it to the playoffs mathematically is Indiana. They have a bye this week, and even if the sky fell and they lost to Purdue the final week, they would still finish the season with 1 loss and go to the Big Ten championship game, and that would mean Indiana is in. To me, however, Ohio State is not automatic yet. We're talking mathematically here, not realistically, okay? They still have to play Rutgers and Scum, and while it is a very high percentage that they will win probably both of those games, if the sky fell and they lost both of those games, do they still get in? A loss to Rutgers? That would be horrible, and everybody would be screaming they don't belong in the playoffs if they lost to Rutgers. So then they wouldn't have even made the conference championship game, and they will be a 2-loss team. Would they get in? Yeah, probably, because they're Ohio State and they have the brand, and that makes most of the country hate them. But Ohio State is only going to get more haters as we move on. They are the Alabama of college football when Alabama had Nick Saban. Ryan Day is very smart, and he knows how to win national championships now. And he is taking that knowledge and dominating college football the way Saban did. So while I don't love this graphic from ESPN, it does show you which teams you can expect to see in the top 4 or 5 as the season winds down these last couple of weeks. Now let's take a look at the current SEC standings. Texas A&M sits atop of the SEC, followed now by Georgia with Bama's loss to Oklahoma, followed by Ole Miss, Bama, Vanderbilt, and Oklahoma still in the hunt. Oklahoma really stayed in the hunt for a playoff spot with that huge win over Bama this weekend, with probable wins against Missouri and LSU to finish out the season. Ole Miss is going to cruise into the playoffs with a bye this week, and Mississippi State left on their schedule. And even if Ole Miss lost to Mississippi State, they would be in the playoffs. Vanderbilt needs to win out against Kentucky and Tennessee, and I just don't think they can do it. Maybe Kentucky beats Vanderbilt, maybe not, but I do see Tennessee beating Vanderbilt. I will get into more of that in a moment of why I think that will happen, but I do think Tennessee will beat Vanderbilt and knock them out of the playoffs. So I see 5 SEC teams that have a pretty legitimate shot at getting into the playoffs. That's pretty much every team you see here except Vanderbilt. And then there were 2 for the current ACC standings. If you look at this graphic here, I think the winner of the ACC, and if they win out, Miami, are the only 2 teams getting in for the ACC. The committee has made it very clear how they feel about the ACC, and the highest rated team in the ACC is most likely not to be going to the championship game, and that's Miami. And if you're Miami, that's good. You finish the season 10-2 and you get into the playoffs without an extra championship game, they'll take it. For everyone else in the ACC, they're going to have to earn their way in, and the committee has made that pretty clear. So I see 2 teams getting into the playoffs for the ACC. All right. Let's take a look at the Big 12 standings. The Big 12 is down to 4 teams left in the race. Cincinnati, who I was low-key rooting for as an Ohio guy, got knocked out by the Arizona Wildcats this weekend, and that's the school that's located where I currently live. I was not surprised by this because the Wildcats are like the Washington Huskies. You know, if the good version of their team shows up that day, then you are in trouble, and they can beat many teams. And that's what happened to Cincinnati over the weekend. The good Arizona Wildcats team showed up to Cincinnati and they took them out. Cincinnati does, however, have a chance to play spoilers as they host BYU this weekend. So we will see what happens, but if I had to guess how this was going to play out, I could see Texas Tech, BYU, and Utah all into the playoffs, because if USC loses to Oregon, we're only looking at 3 Big Ten teams that are 2 losses or less that will get into the playoffs, and that opens up an extra spot, and I could see a Big 12 team getting in that spot. Hey, quick time out here. Please take a moment to just subscribe, comment, and like. If you do all 3 of those things, you'll really help me out in getting the word out for this show. Help me hopefully gain a larger audience I would greatly appreciate it. So comment, like, and subscribe, please. And go Bucks. Let's take a look at this week's AP Top 25 for Week 13. As I've previously stated on my show, I record this on Sunday. The College Football Playoff Committee ranks don't come out till Tuesday evening. So as a guy who records this out of his office in his house, who works a job Monday through Friday, I just don't have the time or team, if you will, because it's only me to do a recording during the week. But if somehow that were able to change in the future, I'd be happy to do multiple recordings in a week. 2 to 3 times a week would be ideal, but this would have to be what I do for a living for that to happen. So anyway, this week I actually have no complaints about the AP. I mean, you could argue who belongs where in a couple of spots, and you'll see that mine is a little different, and I'll show you by comparison next. But they are pretty much where they should be with the teams in the top 10. I'm sure if you're a Hurricanes fan, you believe they should be above Notre Dame, but the Hurricanes' losses are just bad, and I couldn't myself justify putting Miami ahead of Notre Dame. So here's my top 10. Coming in at number 1, of course, is the Ohio State University. They just look like the best team in the country and clearly separated from everyone else. They just don't look like they have any weaknesses. They played this weekend without their top 2 receivers and still won 48-10. Granted, it was a bad UCLA team, but Ohio State still dominated that football game. Coming in at number 2 this week, I moved Indiana back up the charts. Indiana deserves to be number 2 after what I saw out of Indiana and A&M. So Indiana won fairly convincingly, and A&M needed a miracle comeback to beat a bad South Carolina team, and this was at home for A&M. That's the other part. I always take that into consideration when I'm looking at a game and how a team performs. And if you perform poorly at home, a totally different ball game than on the road. So A&M drops to number 3, and that's really only because they won and they stay undefeated. If they would have lost that game, they would have dropped much farther for me. Coming in at number 4, Oregon. Again, I believe Big Ten's the best conference in college football. And just because we don't have a top-heavy half and a really bad bottom half like the SEC does, doesn't make the SEC any better. If you really dig into the SEC's schedule like I did this past week, you'll see that all these teams that are 1-loss, 2-loss teams, they're playing the other teams that are at the bottom of the league. It's really misleading to have this many teams at the top in the SEC. That actually argues against how good a conference is. It actually shows that the conference is very split, that the top half is heavy and the bottom half is very weak. And having said all that, coming in at number 5, making a huge leap is Georgia. They are a 1-loss team. They did dominate Texas pretty handily, and it's impressive when you can score 21 points in the fourth quarter to finish a game. I don't know if Texas mentally had just kind of quit or gave up at that point, but Georgia did dominate them in the final quarter of the game, and they do look like a better football team than they looked 2 weeks ago. So I have to give them credit where credit is due. Coming in at number 6, I have Texas Tech. Again, with that defensive line, they're capable of beating anyone in the country. And I mean anyone. Number 7, Ole Miss. A little misleading 1-loss ranking, and we'll get into that soon. I have something I want to show you guys that I did this week. That's coming up very soon. Number 8, Oklahoma officially should be considered the best 2-loss team in the country after beating Alabama. Number 9, Alabama, and then number 10, Notre Dame, the top 3 2-loss teams in the country. Normally, I would show respect for a former Buckeye player here and do this week's Legends in Scarlet and Gray series, but I also took a lot of time to put together some numbers, and I really want to go over these numbers with you now. I will update this chart for the next couple of weeks, finishing out the season and going into the playoffs. So if you look at this chart I have here, I have taken the time and used my resources, me, to put a chart together of wins and losses in my own version, mini version, if you will, of strength of schedule. And I did this because the narrative that likes to be thrown around is, oh, you don't play anybody. And that goes to multiple teams. So now if you're watching this show and you are from SEC country, or you're scum, otherwise known as Michigan, you might want to call a smarter friend that went to a college in the Big Ten elsewhere to help you understand this chart. Or you can take the chart and copy it and then throw it into Chat GPT, and you can ask Chat GPT to dumb it down to a second grade level so you can understand it. So on the left, we have team name. Pretty simple. I hope you can understand that part. Next, we have the team's overall record. Then we have the record of all of their opponents overall. So overall is all of their opponents overall. Then we have the record of non-conference opponents. So whoever a team played in the non-conference, whether that's 3 or 4 teams if you're in the SEC, that's the record of their non-conference opponents. Then we have the record of wins. So, for example, only the teams that they have beaten. So if you look at Georgia, the teams they have beaten have an overall record of 53-40. And then the final column is the record of the teams they lost to. So again, using Georgia, their only loss is to Alabama, and the record for their losing opponent is 8-2. So again, if you are from the SEC or scum, you may need to rewind that and listen to the explanation multiple times. But for the rest of you that are tracking, here are the takeaways. Anything you see highlighted in red is a losing record. So the most glaringly obvious fraud is Vanderbilt. You can see in 3 categories, which are essentially all of their wins, that are to losing teams overall. Where else is a standout? So A&M, Oregon, Ole Miss, and Scum all have wins against teams which so far have losing records overall as a collective. Now, that does not mean every team they beat has a losing record. Again, you have to understand the chart. It's a version of my own football power index. It's not complete because I don't have that kind of time to look up every team's strength of schedule and who they played and put all that together, but it does give you an idea of who is legit and who is a fraud. Now, who currently up to this week has won the games against opponents with the most wins and least losses? That would be USC at 53-38, followed by Georgia at 53-40. So take some time to look at it and understand it. It will change in the last couple of weeks. For example, with USC playing Oregon, etc. But it does give you an idea of who wins against quality competition and who has been getting by with bad wins. If you look at someone like Alabama with the loss to a bad FSU team and non-conference schedule opponents that are 11-19 so far, you would have to believe that their SEC schedule and SEC teams, they have to be our quality wins. Do I believe that? No. Why? Because Missouri and Vanderbilt, while they do have winning records, they are not quality wins. We can see how it looks by season's ends, but as a great example, for next week, Ohio State plays Rutgers. Rutgers is 5-5, so they won't change much during that week. But when Ohio State goes to and beats an 8-3 or 9-2 scum team, for example, it will raise their opponent's record quality for higher wins and less losses. Someone like Georgia, who has to play, I don't know, they play some scam team this weekend, it's going to hurt them going into after this weekend because they don't play a real team this week. So check it out. Let me know what you think. and talk to me about it in the comments below. It's a really good indicator of not only who's playing higher quality teams, but who actually wins when they play the higher quality teams. Vanderbilt doesn't win against the higher quality teams. Really, nobody does except Ohio State and Indiana, the only undefeated teams. And Georgia. I'll give Georgia credit. Yes, they only lost to Alabama, but they have beaten some higher quality teams like Ole Miss, for example. If you believe that Ole Miss is a higher quality team, their record says that they are. Their non-conference opponents are 18-23, and the teams that Ole Miss has beaten combined are 45 and 56. So is Ole Miss a high quality team? Maybe that will help you answer that question. All right, now it's time for my top 5 games predictions for next week, week 13. As I stated, I went 3-2 last week, thanks to the unpredictability of the SEC and which team is going to show up that week. So I was 43-19 before that. So when you put my 3-2 in there, that makes me 46-21 overall. Still a pretty good winning percentage overall, I think, for picking. But let's get into these games for week 13. First game we have is Ohio State versus Rutgers. Pretty obvious. Ohio State's a 33.5 point favorite. Ohio State averages 38 points per game. Rutgers averages 30 points per game. Defensively, Ohio State gives up 7.5 points per game, and Rutgers gives up 30 points per game. Rutgers couldn't be any more even on paper. They're 5-5. They score 30 points per game. They give up 30 points per game. You can't be any more even than that as a team. So the thing about Rutgers is they can actually pass the ball really well, and that will be a test for Ohio State's pass defense. Obviously, Ohio State's going to win this game. Whether or not they win by 33.5 points, and it doesn't really matter to me. I don't bet on spread. That's up to you. But just know this could go either way as far as covering the spread or not covering the spread, because Rutgers is a solid passing offense. The next game I picked is Missouri at Oklahoma. The only SEC game this week worth even talking about or looking at, frankly. And Oklahoma is favored by 9.5 at home. Missouri's offense averages 35 points per game, if you can believe that or not. Oklahoma averages 28 points per game. Missouri's defense gives up 20 points per game, and Oklahoma gives up about 15 points per game. Now, I actually think this game could be closer than the 9.5 point spread given to Oklahoma, but Oklahoma at home, I do like them to make just a little bit more of an extra player to make the difference in this game. So I'm picking Oklahoma at home to win this game. All right, next game is USC at Oregon. Again, probably the biggest game of the week, especially if you're a Big Ten fan, especially if you're a USC or Oregon fan. Oregon is favored at home by 9.5 points. I think that's pretty large spread for Oregon. USC averages 38 points a game. Oregon averages 39 points per game. USC typically doesn't score at that type of clip against the higher level teams. And frankly, neither does Oregon. Defensively, USC gives up 22 points per game, and Oregon gives up 14 points per game. Now, to me, I think both offenses are actually pretty equal. I just give the edge to Oregon's defense in this game. So I do like Oregon to win this game at home. I wouldn't bet on a 9.5 point spread. I don't think Oregon will win this game by a lot. I think it'll be a pretty close game, and Oregon will just barely squeak it out for a couple reasons. One, I don't think Oregon is that much better than USC. Also, USC has to win this game to stay alive for the playoff hunt. They have to win it. If they don't win, they're out. So hopefully, for USC's sake, they show up with high desperation mode and high fight, and they're giving this game everything they can from the beginning. They can't be a USC team that shows up and doesn't play so great in the first half and tries to come back in the second half and be a better team, which they have done multiple times this year. That will not work against Oregon. USC will need to be fired up right away, and they will have to give it their all. If they don't, then maybe 9.5 points isn't enough of a spread, because Oregon will beat them by more than that if USC doesn't start off well. The next game is BYU at Cincinnati. Just numbers wise, BYU is 9-1, Cincinnati 7-3. BYU is a 2.5 point favorite. Offensively, they both average 34 points per game. Defensively, BYU only gives up 18 points per game to Cincinnati's 23. I think Cincinnati being at home helps, but I do think BYU has the better defense, and I like BYU to win this game in a close game. I think if they win, they'll cover the 2.5 point spread. So if you believe BYU is going to win, I would take them with the spread. But overall, BYU should win this game. And then finally, Pitt, who is 7-3 at Georgia Tech, who is 9-1. At minus 2.5 points per game. Now, offensively, Pitt averages 37 points per game to Georgia Tech's 36, and defensively, Pitt gives up 23 points per game to Georgia Tech's 24. I really don't see a huge disparity in level of team skills and play in these two teams, and the only reason I'm going with Georgia Tech is because it's a home game. If this game was at Pitt, I would probably pick Pitt. But in this case, I'm just picking Georgia Tech in the 2.5 to win this game. So, notice you only see one SEC game in my games of the week, even though you have these 6 teams at the top of their league, all fighting to win the SEC or get into the playoffs. You see one game in my game of the week. And why is that? And that's because this is the we are afraid to play real games week for most of the SEC. So most of them will be playing teams that don't even belong on the same football field with them, and the rest don't really matter or have a bye. So this will be a less fulfilling weekend for college football fans. But hopefully this is the last year we see this cowardice from the SEC with their new 9-game conference schedule, but we'll see going forward. Just because they play 9 games doesn't mean they just won't get rid of one of those earlier easy team games that typically are on everyone's schedule, because this second to the last week stuff is lame and it needs to come to an end. And frankly, I hope the committee starts punishing the SEC. I would drop the SEC for playing Charlotte in the second to, if you're a team that plays Charlotte in the second to last game of the season, I'm talking to you, Georgia. You should be dropped in the rankings after that game. But we'll see what happens going forward. Thank you for watching the show. That will do it for this week's show. Please comment, like, and subscribe. I am open to conversations, whether they be agreements or legitimate debates. I'm here for it. So thanks for listening to the Buckeye Battle Cry Show. Make sure you follow me on YouTube at Buckeye Battle Cry Show, or listen to me anywhere you can find podcasts if you don't have time to watch me on YouTube. And until then, bleed scarlet and gray. Go Bucks.